Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of Carbon Sequestration Week. We're going to be talking about climate-wise landscaping today. We have excellent panelist Ginny Stibolt, who's the author of Climate-Wise Landscaping, the book, which is the basis for this conversation today. I have to admit, we have a little bit of a funny situation, which is that she hasn't logged on yet. So we're hoping she will show up here. We're going to get started, and hopefully she'll join us here in a moment. But my name is Brian Stewart from Electrify Now, and of course my partner Joe Wachunas will be hosting today. All right, so in case, and for those of you who don't know, we are Electrify Now. We're a voluntary organization devoted to empowering everyone to create our clean energy future, helping to be part of the transition away from fossil fuels to clean renewable energy. And we try to make it really simple by helping people to understand how to clean up your electric supply by getting clean renewable energy into your home. There's multiple ways to do that. Then electrify your home by getting rid of fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels in your home through all your appliances, and especially furnaces and water heaters. And then electrify your transportation through electric vehicles or electric bicycles if you're a bike riding person. And then we need to bring everyone along this journey with us, which is Electrify Everyone. And there's all these ways. If you do these things together, you can avoid over 20 tons of carbon emissions, but you can also help speed up the transition to clean renewable energy globally. A shout out to all the members of our coalition. There's over 40 groups now that work with us on this topic, promoting electrification and the education around the benefits of electrification. We also want to say thank you to all of you who have contributed to our Electrify Everyone Fund. You will have seen that on the registration. This is a program we do and run in partnership with Community Energy Project, a fabulous nonprofit here in the Portland area, where we install free heat pump water heaters for low-income families, replacing gas water heaters, saving these families hundreds of dollars a year in their energy bills, but also avoiding over 25 tons of carbon of the life of the water heater. We've installed 50 of these to date. We raised almost $4,000 last year just through the webinars. And I think this week we have well over $600 from contributions from people like you. So thank you. And also a reminder, anyone who donated, we are going to raffle off 2 free copies of Ginny Stibolt's book, Climate-Wise Landscaping, to those who contributed. So we'll be sending that out later, probably early next week. Okay, so that brings us to Sequestration Week 2. And while we're talking about the events, I think we're going to do a quick poll here. Yes, Joe, do we have a poll? I can't remember if we decided to do that or not.
You know what? I don't think the poll's set up. We'll see about later on in the episode.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's been interesting because this week, during some of the earlier episodes, we've been asking people what their interest is, and we had some. It's always fun to find out. But I can tell you this: that we had people join us from over 40 countries. We've had 2,000 people register for our events this week, and it's been a really interesting mix of people from concerned citizens to people from academia, government, volunteer, like NGOs and nonprofits, as well as people from the building and the agriculture and the energy sector. So it's been great to get that data. All right, we've had 4 sessions so far, starting with this overview on Monday. We did an amazing session on regenerative agriculture, which I would encourage you to check out. If you're interested in this topic today, you're probably interested in that one. We did a great session on direct air capture, and then we had an amazing conversation about oceans yesterday. And I have to say that all of this is probably the perfect lead up for our conversation today, because the week has really given us the perspective on how important and daunting this task of carbon sequestration, carbon removal is going to be. And so it's really nice to end the week with a topic that's more about what we can do in our own lives, climate-wise landscaping. All right, so with that, Joe, why are we talking about landscaping, and how does that relate to carbon sequestration?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, and I think a lot of you are as well. Why landscaping? Why carbon sequestration? What can you do to sequester carbon at home and in any other areas that you might ever have control over? So We'll be getting to that in 1 second, but we do want to remind folks, of course, as we've been doing all week, that the first priority of Electrify Now and many of us should be to stop our human-caused emissions as soon as possible from fossil fuels, gas, oil, coal, and replace them with clean, renewable energy-powered electricity that go into your EV and heat pumps. Use these technologies to really decarbonize your lives, and electrification is the way to do that. But as we do this, and if you've been following our webinars this week, we've kind of highlighted that legacy emissions remain from the last 200 plus years of burning fossil fuels. It's not going to be enough just to decarbonize, even though that's our top priority, but we're going to have to remove something like 5 to 15 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere starting in 2050. We have to start now, but we have to ramp up to that level. And of course, that, as we've been saying throughout the week, that equals all of our emissions in the United States from the year 2020. Now, this is a global number, so we have to get to that, but you can just get an idea of the enormity of how much we're going to need to start sequestering to keep our climate livable. So that's why we talk and organize a whole week devoted to carbon sequestration. We have, a thing on forests from last year. We'll put our Electrify Now YouTube in the chat. Agriculture was on Tuesday. Oceans was yesterday. Please, if you missed these, they were incredible. Enhanced weathering, we will get to probably next year's sequestration week. And last year we did industrial carbon capture and storage. And then Wednesday of this week, we did direct air capture. So it's just all incredible technologies to help us sequester carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground. So, but as we really, what led us to this topic and what Brian and I are most interested in is encouraging individuals to take some of this climate crisis into our own hands and see what we can do to remove carbon in our own lives. So whether that's from forests to some agriculture and gardening, there are ways that we can remove carbon from the atmosphere and take part in this movement. And just wanted to highlight a little bit of how jazzed I am about this. I know many of us are. This is my house in 2012. We bought this ranch and a little bit of landscaping. And this picture on 2020 doesn't do quite justice, but we've been able to plant something around 17 trees to date. And and these trees, as this session will let us know, not only provide sequestration but cooling and water transpiration. So there's so many benefits of planting trees, and pictures kind of say 1,000 words. You can also, I'm always excited about kind of marking an event in our lives by planting a tree. This was when we moved into our house in 2012. We planted this little white oak, and this was it 2 years ago in 2020. This white oak is just, it's as long as we've been in the house, it's growing, and it's so exciting. And then our kids, Elia and Nina, each of them got a tree when they were born, and so we'll be marking the passage of time. So there's so much to celebrate with planting trees, and I know many of you have done that as well. I'd love to hear about how you have planted and gardened in the chat, so please feel free to put that in. And then, beyond our own homes, one thing that my wife and I have done, and curious to see if you all have as well, is, there's a lot of land around cities, and, it depends on the proximity, that's really inexpensive and not being used for a lot of productive agriculture. For example, we found, about an hour and a half outside of our house, our home of Portland, Oregon, we found in Goldendale, Washington, land was pretty cheap. We were able to buy 5 acres for under $40,000. And this land, we've talked to the USDA, and this land was, before Europeans arrived, was forested. But now it's used to grow hay. And when we talked to the farmers that were harvesting this hay, 5 acres was producing enough hay for about to feed a cow for about half a year. So, it's not very productive land. And this could be used to sequester carbon and grow trees. So we're currently partnering with USDA to plant 800 ponderosa pines that grow well. They're a native tree in this habitat. And it'll, my back of the envelope calculations is these over the next couple decades will sequester 150,000 pounds of CO2, a drop in the bucket. But if all of us are working in concert together on our at our homes and and possibly at some surrounding land that's not being used very productively, what couldn't we do to help this carbon sequestration movement, and that's really exciting to me. So last thing I'll say is that we are planting on this land next week. So we're really excited to do that, and we'll share some updates. So let's, Ginny, you've been able to make it. We're so excited. You're giving us a little bit of a scare, but so excited to have you on. So today we will.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Climate-wise landscaping, and we're going to answer some questions on. We'll first give some practical guidance on how we can manage our own property to sequester carbon and help the landscape survive climate change, which is a major task ahead of us. Help
Yes.
wildlife survive climate change and give them a place to live, and then help mitigate climate change. How can we sequester and shade our homes as the world gets hotter? And you know, I have Ginny's book that I'll show you in just a second. We're raffling 2 off. And we really love this quote by Doug Tallamy, who says, read this book. Oh, my chat is in the way. Read this book carefully. Everything you need to know to heal our relationship with planet Earth and empower you to make a much needed difference is within these pages. So I've been reading this book, and I can agree with that. And we're so excited to have our panelists on today. Ginny Stibolt, who's a botanist and a garden writer. She's written 4 peer-reviewed Florida gardening books, all published by University Press Florida. She co-wrote the award-winning Climate-Wise Landscaping, Practical Actions for a Sustainable Future, which we'll see today with Sue Reed. In addition, she manages a Sustainable Gardening for Florida Facebook page and writes for her own blog, Green Gardening Matters. So without further ado, we will stop sharing. Then, Ginny, if you have your slides ready to go.
Yeah, my computer's not behaving. That's part of my problem. I may have to switch to my other computer. My PowerPoint is not responding on this computer. You know, I don't know what happened to it.
Welcome
it
to
was fine.
the COVID world. We're all used to that, no problem. Do you feel like you need to switch and we can hear from folks in the chat what they're doing on their gardening while you switch?
Yeah, let me try one more time.
Okay. And folks, yeah, feel free to put questions for Ginny in the chat, or excuse me, in the Q&A, and then love to hear your own gardening experiences.
Ginny, the other thing you could do, if you want, you could email me your presentation and I can drive it for you. We can try that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I went to my laptop because I wanted to. Oh, there it is. Oh, good. Okay. All right. For some reason, it didn't want to come up. Okay, I can share my screen now. Share. And start the. All right, and I need to go to the. Presentation. I've done this a million times.
Up on the slideshow?
Yeah, we're down in the lower right-hand corner there. You can click on the little icon. There you go.
All right, can you see that all right? No. Okay. Let me stop the share and I'll do it again.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. All right.
Whoa, that looks great.
Woohoo.
Well, okay. Again, I apologize.
That's all right.
Anyway, so writing a book about climate-wise landscaping was daunting, and many knowledgeable people told us, both Sue and myself, that we should not even use climate in the title because it was so divisive. And fortunately, our publisher, New Society Press, said that it was okay that we would use climate in the title. But what we didn't do is we did not discuss climate change or debate it or anything. We just said, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and get busy. What can we do right now in our yards and in our communities? And again, we were really thrilled to have Doug Tallamy do the foreword for us. And Doug Tallamy, if you don't know him, is an amazing guy. He's an entomology professor at the University of Delaware, and he's changed the whole narrative about native plants and why they're important. He's our superhero. As a native plant enthusiast, he's our superhero. I've met him a number of times, and I'll be talking about him a couple of times. So what we're going to talk about here today is actions that you can do in your community and in your yard. And I'll provide some background on the importance of native plants and more that you can do to actually mitigate climate change in your yards. And one of the things about doing a book like this is when you do research, you end up opening your eyes and looking at things in new ways. So I'll be talking about a couple of things that sort of caught me by surprise. And Sue and I decided that an action would be a climate-wise action if it accomplished at least one of these three missions: to help your landscape become more resilient, so as climate changes that it can survive, and to help wildlife survive climate change, and to actually mitigate climate change. So some of our actions do all three, but all of them do at least one of these. And when we arranged the book, we have 10 sections, starting with lawns, and so I'll start with that. And then we had 5 set-asides, which were our science primers. And this was just the science behind our advice in case people wanted to know. So we didn't want to interrupt the narrative. So they're set-asides that like here, so that it's there if people are interested. So why did we start with lawns? Well, lawns is the easiest thing that most people can do, and it will have the biggest impact on climate. And it saves you money, and it saves water, because 30 to 60% of our municipal water supply is spent on lawns. It's just an amazing amount of water. And we'll get to water later, but saving water has multiple climate-wise things that it happens. So turf grass is the largest irrigated crop, and it's more than corn and wheat and fruit orchards put together. So we have 40 million acres of lawn. So we need to rethink the lawn, and that's the biggest thing that you can do. And Doug Tallamy, we're coming back to him again, has started a new initiative called Homegrown National Park, where he wants you to replace at least half of your lawn with native plants and native habitat, and then go into their application, homegrownnationalpark.org, and register your yard and your community as part of the Homegrown National Park. So wouldn't that be cool if half of our lawns, and we would have 20 million acres of native plants instead of lawns. So first you want to reduce the lawn, and then you look at what's left. You want to make what's left of the lawn more sustainably cared for. And if you live in an arid area, you shouldn't have lawn at all. But if you live where there's at least 20 inches of rain per year, then you can have some kind of a lawn without extra irrigation. So we want to stop all of the poisons, the landscape-wide poisons that lawn services put down, the insecticides, the fungicides, the herbicides, and whether they're organic or not doesn't make any difference, because all of these poisons end up, making it hard for the grass itself to grow. So then they put synthetic fertilizers to keep the lawn going on sort of a synthetic thing to keep it alive, and then they irrigate too much, and then in the summer or whenever it's dormant, and that in the winter here in Florida, our lawns go dormant during our dry winters. And so what the lawn companies do is they seed the lawns with winter ryegrass, and then they'll have something to mow. What we do in ours, we just stop mowing at the beginning of November all the way to March. We still haven't mowed our yard this season yet. So some people call these lawns freedom lawns because they're free from all of these things. And when you have a lawn like this, you're going to end up with a whole lot of different plants. It's not going to be a monoculture of one type of grass. You're going to have all kinds of things that grow in the lawn. And so what you want to think about is that you would want to appreciate the diversity. These plants can also support pollinators and butterflies, and it doesn't have poisons on it, so it's safe for your kids and your pets. And again, you'll save money, and you'll mow it less often because if you're not fertilizing it, it's not going to grow as fast. And in the part where you have left, you want to create an area so that when the lawnmower comes by, that it doesn't have to come back later and do string trimming. So part of having a sustainable climate-wise landscape is to make it easier to mow. And if you have a lawn tree, and that seems to be the default landscape in developments, is that, you know, you've got a bunch of shrubs along the foundation and you've got a tree in the middle of the lawn, and that's it. That's your default landscape. So what we're saying is that if you're taking out lawn, one of the places to take it out is around those lawn trees, because then it's better for the tree, and then you're building habitat. And you will also make those corners very round, so it's easy to mow. So why is this kind of lawn care climate-wise? Because the unpoisoned soil sequesters more carbon, and that's our topic, of course, for today. And when you're not using those poisons and fertilizers, then it saves on a heavy climate footprint for the manufacturer and transport. And the reduced irrigation helps preserve our endangered aquifers, and as we'll find out, also saves energy. And the diverse lawn plants and the healthy soil, support the wildlife. And the reduced use of power tools reduces the greenhouse gas emissions. So, there's all kinds of good reasons to let your lawn go and have it be a freedom lawn. I have an article in my blog about my freedom lawn, so there's more information there. And then, even though we want to reduce the use of power tools, when you do have power tools that are needed, like that's my husband over there with a battery powered chainsaw. After Irma hit a couple of years ago, we lost 8 big trees on our property. We have 1.5 acres, so we don't have a huge place, but we lost big trees. And so almost all of that was done with his battery powered saw. And he would bring 2 or 3 batteries down with him so that he could just, when the power ran out, that he could just switch the batteries, because he has all of these tools use the same battery. Now, trees and shrubs is a huge topic, and trees will cool the air. They'll actually cool the air. We'll get to that. Of course, they'll sequester carbon as long as they're alive. They'll stabilize the soil, and again, they'll support the wildlife, and they add value to your landscape. And so what we recommend here is that you don't put lawn underneath your trees, that you do something else. But yes, the trees will sequester carbon. But let's be smart about this. We want not to buy huge, big plants. We want smaller, easier to manage plants, and that will grow more easily and will convert to your yard more easily. And we want to plant not just one kind of tree, but a diversity of trees. And, some of the municipalities over the years have planted one kind of tree on the streets, like elms or ashes, and then one bug or invasive insect comes and ruins the whole planting. So in an urban environment, you want to have a diversity of street trees, not just the same thing over and over and over again, because then it would be more resilient. In Baltimore, Maryland, they value each street tree in their canopy at $57,000. And so they have put that number on the tree because of the carbon sequestration, because of the cooling, because of happier in people who live there, the residents are happier, and it also reduces crime when you have more trees on the street. So Baltimore has been, very ahead of the game when it comes to valuing trees, because a lot of times municipalities just cut down the trees when they get too big, and they just replace them with little tiny trees that won't even begin to make up for those mature trees until much later. All right, so when you're buying a tree, and this is a small little tutorial on trees, don't buy big trees. And here is a magnolia that has that was in a big box store. It has been topped. So trees that have been topped don't live as long. But garden gurus have said, well, buy the bushiest plant you can get. And so the way to get a tree bushy is to top it. But that will cut the life of the tree. So you want untopped trees, you want small trees. This one has a 3-inch caliper trunk, so that would mean that it's about like this. It's 6 inches above the root thing, and it's going to be pot bound. So this is a bad investment in time and money and water, because it may or may not make it in your yard, and it's going to be expensive. So you buy a small tree, it's only a couple of years old, that hasn't been in there. And also the climate footprint of growing these large trees. There's a larger climate footprint than one that's only been in a pot for a couple of years. And when you get a container grown tree at home, what you want to do is rinse all that rich growing medium out of there, because you want to find the coiling roots and stretch them out. And you want to stretch them out so that the tree will become more wind tolerant and more drought tolerant. And you don't want that rich soil in the planting hole, because then the roots will just stay in the planting hole rather than to go out into the native soil, which may be much leaner. So this is a tough love kind of thing. And when you plant it, you don't prune it at all, because the tree needs all the energy it can get. And it gets its energy from the leaves, from photosynthesis. And the science for this is on informedgardener.com. It's Linda Chalker-Scott's horticultural myths page, and there's all kinds of information there based on science. So, and this is what happens if you don't fix the coiling roots. So the people who planted these copper beeches probably thought they were doing a pretty good job, because they left the whole casing. You can still see the orange plastic around here. And they wanted to do that because this is not wide enough for a big tree. So this is probably 20 years after they were planted. So the people who planted them said, wow, those trees really look good. But what it did is it choked itself off because the roots were coiling. They didn't straighten out those roots. And if they had, it would have ruined the sidewalk and the tree. So it was a bad choice for a tree right there. But now they don't have anything. And you can maximize the placement in your landscape of the tree, so that these serviceberry trees are on the south side of the house, so that in the summertime they cast shade. It's deciduous, so in the wintertime they'll get sun. And transpiration is a huge thing for trees, because what it does is it actually cools the air. So yeah, not only do trees sequester carbon and everything else, they actually cool the air. So planting more trees is one of those actions that we can take that will do all three of our missions on a climate-wise landscape. So when we plant trees in our yards, this is going to be, our trees will become part of the global population. And again, it reduces the actual temperature. So normal mature oak tree, the estimates vary from 400 gallons to 400 liters per day of the transpiration. This would be the evaporation of water from the soil into the air per day on a summer day. And for every gram of water, if it's at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, it will take 585 calories of heat from the atmosphere. So this is actual mitigation. When you have a tree, you walk in the forest, it feels so cool, you think it's a shade, but it's not. It is actually cooler because of that water vapor. And when you chop down the forests, then there's less water vapor in the air. And when there's less water vapor in the air, we're going to have more droughts. And when we have more droughts, we're going to have more fires, and we're going to have more stress in the trees. So the transpiration is one of the best things about trees. And again, I have a whole article on this on my blog. There was just an article this week in the New York Times about planting trees and how not all trees are equal, and that some of the trees that were planted as carbon offsets have done some damage to the environment where they are, like the water-hungry eucalyptus trees from Australia were planted in Africa, and they took up more water, so it actually just was destructive of the savanna landscape. So we have to be careful about which trees we want. And so again, if we are doing restoration work, we want a variety of native trees. Not just one tree. Even if it's native, we don't just want one, we want a wide variety of native trees. All right, so water, the climate change as it's changing can cause too little rain and too much rain. And so a climate-wise landscape has to be prepared for either one. And this is one of the things where my thinking changed. I've been an environmentalist for a really long time, and I know that water is a limited resource, and I've always tried to save water. But what made me rethink this is how much energy it takes to get water to our taps with enough pressure so that we can take a shower. So it takes energy to extract it, it takes energy to treat it, it takes energy to pump it to the various places. It takes energy to put it up into a water tower so that it will have that pressure. So when we save water, we are saving energy. And when we save energy, we are also saving greenhouse gas emissions mostly. So water is not free. It's an amazing thing. So in your landscape, you can put drought tolerant plants to use here, and drought tolerant plants might have small leaves or waxy coatings on their leaves, or tuberous roots, or the ability just to drop its leaves when it's tough and come back out later. And when you're planting them, you want them closely spaced. Instead of having a lot of mulch in between them, you want them closely spaced, and they should be allowed to go to seed. And we'll have some examples coming up on that. And you'd group your plants by moisture preference, so that if you have plants that you want that need moisture, like this mallow and the horsetail here, then you would put them together because they both want a moist habitat, and you put them near a water feature so that you don't have to do extra irrigation. And you would design most of your landscape to survive most of the time on your natural rainfall, mostly. Now, in some extreme drought, you may have to irrigate, and you'll have to irrigate when you are planting your trees and your other things until they become established. And again, one of the advantages of natives is that they should do fine on your local rainfall. But after you do your adjustments to your thing, then you want to adjust your irrigation. So for vegetables and stuff, you might want to switch to drip irrigation. And all rain is local, so get a rain gauge so you know how much rain you actually got. Now, this mulch thing here is just amazing to me. This is a site that I've been to a number of times, and it had a ratty lawn, and they decided they didn't like it anymore. So they took out the lawn, put down weed barrier cloth, and dyed cypress mulch, which is unsustainable. But then they didn't take out the irrigation, so they're watering plain mulch. And you see a lot of plain mulch landscapes for commercial operations, thinking that it's less work, but really it's not. And the weed barrier cloth doesn't keep out weeds, especially if you irrigate them. And what we need to do on our water-wise landscape is to sequester as much water as we can on our own properties. And we can do this with rain barrels and cisterns to collect the water. And this does a couple of things for you as gardeners. So you have extra water for especially your vegetable gardens and stuff like that. But when you use rain barrel water, it hasn't been purified like our tap water. So there's no chlorine or other chemicals in there that will kill the microbes to keep us healthy. But we want the microbes in an organic situation. We want microbes in there because that's part of what makes the soil healthy. And so when you use rain barrel water to wet your compost piles and to water your plants inside and outside, that means that the soil is going to be healthier because you're not killing the microbes. And again, you're using rain barrel water instead of municipal water. So savings for a sunny day. And I have, again, a lot of details on rain barrels on my blog. And we want to slow the rain down, the storm water down with rain gardens or bioswales. And what this does is it collects water from parking lots or curb cuts, and it gathers that water from the rain together. And you'll notice here that the drain is higher than the rain garden, so that it will only drain into the drain at the highest level, and the rest of the time the water is soaked up and it will be absorbed by the plants, or it will filter down into the local aquifers. So rain gardens, both municipal and private rain gardens, help with our being good citizens, because when we have rainwater leaving our landscapes and going into the stormwater drains, it brings pollutants. It brings pollutants from our yard, even just grass clippings or anything like that. It gets the chemicals from the vehicles and stuff like that. So anytime you have water leaving your landscape and going into the storm drain system, that's going to end up equaling pollution into the dearest water. So we all live in a watershed, and keeping the water on our property as much is important. And maybe we need to think a little differently. This is in Singapore, and I love these umbrellas that acted as a gutter for the building, and they collected the water through the tubes that held up the umbrellas. So that we need to sort of think out of the box here and think of multi-use ways where we can collect water and make better use of it. When I talked to the person in the building there, they said they use that water to flush their toilets. So, that kind of thinking is what we need. In the book, we talk about ecosystems and how every yard is part of the local, regional ecosystem in which it exists. It's real important to support the local ecosystems. And you would do this by using native plants. And so again, here is Doug Tallamy's quote that we have in our book. And some of the research that he's done compares the number of caterpillars that are on different trees. So he compared a ginkgo tree with an oak tree, And a ginkgo tree doesn't even exist in the wild anymore. It's from China. It's a primitive tree, but it's widely planted. At least the male version of the ginkgo tree is widely planted as a street tree. But it doesn't support the caterpillars. So what he's saying is that if you want birds, a single pair of breeding chickadees must find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of young. So they're not going to find those caterpillars in the ginkgos, and they may not find them in other non-native plants either. So that's why you want these ecosystems, so that you can support the birds, and you can, people see tent caterpillars around here right now. They're on our cherry trees. And I used to say, oh my God, that's terrible. But now I say, oh, wow, look at bird food. And that's how we have to think a little differently, because we are not the only species on the planet. So these are some things: develop wild areas, leave some sticks. And if you have a butterfly garden, you don't just want flowers, you also want to support the caterpillars, because without the caterpillars, you won't get the butterflies. So milkweed is, the flowers will feed many type of insects, but the milkweed is absolutely essential for monarch butterflies and queen butterflies and viceroy butterflies. So they have bitter compounds, and their caterpillars have learned to tolerate them. So if you want to support monarch caterpillars, then you need to plant milkweed. And much of the milkweed that used to grow as weeds along agriculture fields and stuff like that has been killed out with Roundup and stuff, with the Roundup Ready crops. So we as citizens need to plant more milkweed and other larval sources. So a real butterfly cheers when something is eating her lawn, her plants. Oh, soil is just an amazing thing. And we talked about this a little bit the other day, but soil sequesters 4 times more carbon than all the terrestrial plants, not the ocean, but all the terrestrial plants. They all have carbon that they secure, but the soil has 4 times more. So what we want to do as gardeners is to minimize the disturbance in the soil, avoid compacting the soil, and you want to build compost out of your leftovers, and you want to cover bare soil so that it's protected. And how does soil get carbon? It's from photosynthesis. You talked about this earlier this week. Photosynthesis is most people are familiar with that. It takes carbon dioxide and water with sun, and it makes sugars with the leftover of oxygen. So we couldn't exist without that. But then everything in the ecosystem, in the terrestrial ecosystem, uses those sugars in one way or another to gain energy for life. So the equal and opposite reaction is respiration. So you and me and the trees and the grass and the caterpillars and the algae and the fungi all absorb sugar somehow, some way. They all breathe in oxygen, and then they breathe out carbon dioxide and water. So these are equal and opposite reactions. So if we look in a forest, what is happening is that the forest makes a lot of oxygen, but only about 20% of it is in excess because of all of the critters that are in the forest that are using that oxygen to survive. So there's not that much extra oxygen. So many people say, well, the forests are the lungs of the world. Well, no, it's the oceans that are the lungs of the world. But, forests are important, but they're not that. So when the plants and the animals die, or when they have waste, then those things get incorporated into the soil. And so the partially decomposed plants and animals and their waste is what the carbon is in the soil. And that's how it goes in. But how does it go out? Well, you can lose carbon in the soil very easily. So that's my left hand there in this picture here in Costa Rica. And the rainforests, most rainforests have very thin soils because it rains so much, and because it's hot, the whole metabolism of that ecosystem is so high that there's so many critters inside that soil eating it in one way or another that the soil is quite thin. And that's why in rainforests you often see buttressed roots. You know how the roots go out like that? It's because the soil is so thin, they have to have those roots to grow that tall. And that's the reason why, is because in most parts of the rainforest, the soil is thin. Now, there are some parts of rainforests that have peat underneath them, and we'll get to peat in a minute. So it takes a long time to create soil. It goes away very quickly. So if you have a high microbe activity, like in a rainforest, if you disturb the soil, like tilling, which we talked about earlier this week, if you have high rainfall and erosion, then the soil loses its carbon. But peat is a whole different thing. Now, peat is formed by a partially decomposed plant and animal matter, mostly plants. And it's in a wet area, usually where there's no oxygen, which is called hypoxia. So of all the soil, remember the soil sequesters 4 times more carbon than all the plants, terrestrial plants. Peat is only 3% of the soil by surface area, but it sequesters 30% of the carbon. So it's a huge factor in that sequestration ability. And peat is formed in a number of different places. It's formed under peat bogs, but it's also formed in pine barrens. It's also formed in mangrove forests. It's formed under salt marshes, and the ones that are near the shore, the coastal areas like the mangroves and the salt marshes and the seagrass meadows, the peat that forms under that stays for lots and lots of years. So they cored some peat under some mangrove forests in the Yucatan Peninsula a couple of years ago. And they said it was 7,000 years old by the time they got to the bottom of it. So that is way more sequestration than a rainforest, way more, because the soil stays there. So when we've got peat that's below the sea level, we call that blue carbon. And that is going to be something that we need to spend more time preserving and thinking about. So as gardeners, we never want to use peat moss because it can never be sustained harvestly. In a peat bog, the peat builds up at about 1 millimeter per year. So no matter what they say, it can never be sustainably harvested. So use something else. I use compost that I make. Coconut coir is made from something that's already grown and harvested, and it's a waste product. So coir is equally as absorbent, but it's not as acidic as peat moss. And peat moss actually kills some of the microbes because it is so acidic. And if you look at peat bogs, they have a very low diversity of plants because not very much stuff can live there. And some of the stuff that lives there are like carnivorous plants that figured out how to feed themselves other ways because they can't get the nutrients from the soil. So you don't want to use peat moss in your garden. And you want to reduce your soil disturbance. So the seasonal plantings that are done over and over again, where you take begonias in the spring or impatiens and pansies in the winter, and every couple of months you put in a new planting. This is expected in many communities, but every time, I mean, there's going to be a climate footprint for growing those plants, but then every time you dig up the soil, you release more carbon dioxide. And every time you do that, it's probably, those plants are probably not very good for the environment. So what you want is, not trees and shrubs. You want to plant long-lasting perennials or ground covers so that they don't have to be replaced over and over again. It may be more expensive at the beginning, but it's going to pay off in the long run because it'll be there for years. You want to manage the weeds a little bit better by not disturbing the soil when you pull them out. You want to plant your plants, if you have a cottage garden, so thickly that you don't have room for weeds. And you'd use organic mulch to cover. And no weed barrier cloth. It doesn't work. Roots grow right through it. You know, this is my left hand, so roots grow right through it. That was in our landscape when we bought it. Somebody had lava rocks on the top. An invasive Mexican petunia just said, weed barrier cloth, I don't care. And if you try to remove it, it comes apart. So this is a large, heavy climate footprint for manufacture and transport, and then it doesn't last and it's disruptive to the plants when you finally pull it out, and it ends up in landfills. So don't get it for that. So you'd want to plan and design for multiple things. And so we said, you know, have your lawn only for what you need, but then you have other things, and you want your areas to be energy wise by planting trees so that they'll help with your air conditioning and stuff. You want to have fire-wise and water-wise planting designs. So when a fire comes into a neighborhood, this is where one of the ways that a forest will lose its carbon is when a fire strikes. So if you are in an area where a fire is likely, you can pull out the lower branches down here so a ground fire doesn't have anything to work on, and you can add water features if possible. So there are things you can do to have a more fire-wise landscape. And if you're near the water, then you can have buffers that are near the water and build in living shorelines and stuff. The book that I'm working on now is on living shorelines for Florida. And so I'll be able to get into the weeds there on the blue carbon environment there and help people figure out how to build living shorelines. Herbaceous plants use easy to grow stuff, put them close together, plant them in groupings. This is a front yard picture I took in Seattle, and not one bit of turf in it. It's a beautiful front yard, and you allow them to go to seed. Several times in our book, we talk about the Highline Park and the Lurie Garden in Chicago. A Highline Park is in New York. And these are parks that were designed by Pete Ordorf, and they use native plants, and they don't trim them back. So the plants are allowed to get into their own shape. They feed the birds. So we've got my goldfinch here. This is in Chicago. So again, you want to avoid the seasonal plantings. And many of the times, I'm sure this looks familiar to people, if you ever go into a garden center, or even a garden center or a big box store, you have trays of relatively inexpensive annuals that are in full bloom. As a botanist, I can tell you that these plants are completed their life cycle. They've germinated, they grew, they produce flowers, they're going to seed. And when you take them home, they'll die sooner rather than later. So then in a couple of months, you have to replace them again. So this is a whole business cycle that has been around this, thinking that we need to have something in flower all the time because we're supposed to be like the rich people in Europe and the British Isles who had highly manicured yards to show how rich they were. And many of these plants look good on the shelf because they use systemic insecticides called neonicotinoids. So and it stays in the plant forever. So the last thing you want in a butterfly garden is something that's been poisoned with these systemic insecticides, because it will kill the caterpillars. It will even kill the pollinators. The Highline Park in New York, I mean, look at that. It's a lovely garden path. I mean, you just wouldn't even know that it's in the west side of Manhattan. And that park has actually increased the real estate values on the whole west side of Manhattan because that park has attracted so many people's attention. Native gardens are not wild. They aren't. I mean, there's going to be the hand of the gardener in there, but they do support wildlife. And to make them happen, to make native plants the new normal, we need to support our local native plant societies or wild ones or whatever, because they're the ones that play a role in helping you and helping people plant native. So plantsocieties.org is a group, nationwide group, and that will help. If you go to their website, they can they can direct you to your local groups. And a whole story on invasive plants. This is kudzu, was brought here on purpose, and it was going to, help with erosion control, but it took over whole places. So you want to remove invasives whenever you can, because they are the ones that have taken over spaces in wild areas, and we need to replace them with natives. And again, I have a whole article on invasives on my blog. Florida spends $54 million a year on removing invasives. Urban issues, we've got the urban heat island effect. We need more trees, more green roofs. We need to design for cooling. We need green walls, but we need to make sure that the trees have enough room to grow. We need to create corridors, wildlife corridors in these areas. And again, this is the Highline. It's just tremendously popular. And whenever you see a native plant garden like this, it helps people rethink what a pretty garden should look like. And food. For every pound of food you grow, it offsets 2 pounds of greenhouse gases, and that's for transportation, but mostly refrigerated, and also waste. And it's been estimated that up to 30% of our food that's grown commercially is wasted in the field, and then in handling between the field, the middlemen, and into your grocery store. So when you grow your own food or you buy food locally, then you are helping with that. So just think about how much energy is spent to grow food, and then 30% of it is wasted. When you grow your own food, use raised beds no matter where you are, so that you're not disturbing the soil. You plant intensively so that the plants are close together, and you'd use mulch to protect the soil in between those raised beds. Plant more woody crops, plant more perennial crops. Hydroponics, if you're starting over, hydroponics uses less water than soil-based crops. And you can use green roofs if it's available. You can grow very nice vegetables on green roofs. And even if you don't grow your own food, then you can support local food production, like joining a CSA, which is community supported agriculture. Go to farm to table restaurants and buy from farmers markets. And if you know what they are and you know what the IDs are, you can eat the weeds. This is Meadow Garlic, and I have some in my garden, and it's a really nice little garlic plant that's native from Central Florida to Canada. And the materials that you use in your yard, we have a whole chapter on that. So why is green landscaping important? It's because we, the millions, many millions of gardeners, we can and we should make a difference to help future generations. So that's the quick tour.
Thank you so much, Ginny. That was fantastic.
Yeah, they're very dense. There's a lot of information.
Yes, there's a lot there, and you covered a lot of ground. What? Perhaps you could stop sharing your screen, and then let's do a little bit of. We'll put these links in the follow-up email when we send out to folks, so that I know there are a lot of links there that I'm sure a lot of you are trying to keep track of. We will try to put those in the email that we send out to everyone who was registered, so it'll make it easier for you to find them. Jeannie, I wanted to start with a really general question because, it struck me that one of the themes through your presentation today was around, rethinking our idea of what a healthy garden or a healthy lawn even looks like. And it feels like, in general, we're talking about moving away from these kind of sterile, highly monoculture, highly manicured environments to, more diversity, more richness. But there is perhaps but I'd love you to talk a little bit about this. There's a sort of messiness, perhaps, I don't know if that's the right word, that comes with this,
Sure.
this more sustainable and healthy landscape. And so part of it, I think, is it's a mindset shift. But I wonder, do you have any advice for us on how to get, used to that? Those of us who grew up with these highly manicured gardens and lawns, how do you advise people to kind of relax a little bit, maybe? I don't know.
Well, it's easy to relax about your own yard, but then you want to deal with your neighbors who may think that your butterfly meadow is a pile of weeds. So one good way to help with that is to use signs saying it's native plants that bring this landscape to life, or this is a certified backyard habitat, or, there's a number of signs that you can get that, or a little bit of outreach. And dealing with homeowners associations, especially here in Florida, is really hard. And what I would do is have a no grassroots movement to get on those boards, speak to the boards, and get them to change their rules. And for Florida, I've actually created a PowerPoint presentation that people can download from the Florida Native Plant Society so that they can give it to their own homeowners. It's a 10-minute presentation. And, I think speaking out is real important. And sometimes it pays off. We have in Florida now, we have a front yard vegetable law. And that before that was law, there were municipalities that had rules about what could be growing in your front yard. And, Miami Shores ripped out some lady's vegetable garden in her front yard, and so she sued. And so that was in the news, and our legislators here in Florida, before each legislative session, have an open forum meeting where people who are not affiliated with organizations have 3 minutes to make a point. And so I brought that up, and my senator wrote the law, and now it's a law. So
Nice.
that means that it doesn't cover homeowners associations, but it means it's sort of a double negative law, where it means that municipalities can no longer ban front yard gardens. But speaking up really does work. But you have to, plan ahead for that. And again, you can look at my presentation. Again, it's on the Native Plant Society page, which is fnps.org on the resources. And so that way you can download it and look at it and adapt it for your own environment, because it's very Florida-ish.
We'll try to get that and send that to folks. So that's great, Jenny. We'll get that from you and put that in the email. I did want to get to, some folks were having questions on the peat moss point, which really hit home. One focusing, someone was saying we need to insist that our local garden centers carry peat-free potting soil.
Yes.
And then someone else said, but it's almost like alternatives to peat moss aren't available. Cocoa core is the best I'm aware of, but it has issues as well. So the coconut core is made from the waste products of coconut, but most of it's imported from Indonesia. So it's got a large climate footprint, but still it's better than peat moss. But what I use is my own compost. I make compost, and
that kind of thing. So again, there's a lot of things that we can do, and we don't have to do everything at once. You know, we do a little at a time. It can be daunting.
Yeah. You know, first of all, I want to give a little shout out to Backyard Habitat Certification Program. I'm aware of it here in the Portland area. I highly recommend it. It's a great resource for not only identifying local plants, but giving advice about how to do plantings and what to remove from your garden. It's an amazing service. I would definitely check it out, and I believe it's national. But
it is national. My yard is a habitat, certified habitat, and it's a good exercise to do with kids, because then you have all these little things that you need to do, and so it's a whole educational thing. So you could also certify schools, your local schools, and that's another place to think about spending your time, instead of having all lawn, that they could have wildflower areas.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I wanted to ask you a question. I know there were a little bit of dialogue about this in the chat about, like, here in the Pacific Northwest, for example, you know, native trees that we've grown up with here, some of them are struggling now. Like Western red cedars was an example that was in the chat. And we've seen that in our neighborhood, and I think it's pretty ubiquitous that they've been struggling in these last few years with the heat. So do you have any advice about, you know, it could be that the ideal natives are, you know, a subset of what we currently think of as the native plants in our area. So how does one sort through all that?
There's no way to know ahead of time, but if you plant a diversity rather than a whole bunch of them in a row, that you would plant, instead of a screen of all one thing, that you would plant a hedgerow, so that you would have 5 or 6 different kinds of shrubs and small trees to form your screen, so that if something happens to one of them, you still have the other 7 plants. You know, that your monocultures of any type, and I was talking about that on street trees, are going to end up causing problems, and they have caused problems. So do a diversity, find out what works, and do more of what works. And also, again, you'd want to create understory habitat under the trees. You don't want the trees all by themselves. You want to think about you know, the whole ecosystem, so that you would have, as I showed on that PowerPoint, the lawn tree, you would plant other stuff around it that's compatible. Right. And so you'd have shrubs and maybe other trees if you have enough space, and then eventually ground cover or bunching grasses around there, so that you would have a whole diversity of different plants. And when you have a grove like that, that's actually better for the tree. It's also better for the understory shrubs. And yeah, there are diseases that are coming, and we need to be prepared by having a whole bunch of different things.
That's great. Thanks, Jenny. Another question that came up for me in your presentation, I think you'd mentioned that plant smaller trees. I'm wondering if I could be play devil's advocate on that one. Here in the Northwest, you know, we have these towering trees, and all you know, there's a couple redwoods on my street, and I think to myself, you know, what a way to sequester carbon. I mean, they can just go giant into the atmosphere, you know, and put all that carbon, you know, above us, store it, you know, in these amazing organisms. So we planted a Doug fir and a red cedar. Can you comment a little bit on growing like massive trees on your property? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that they wouldn't get massive. I was thinking that when you planted them, they would be small.
Okay, gotcha.
So that they would have a better chance to adjust to your area. Because if you buy a big tree in a nursery,
gotcha. Okay,
then the chances of its survival are much less, and you'll have to work harder at it because it'll need more water and it may never make it. But if you buy a whip, which would be an untopped 2-year-old tree, then that would have a much better chance of making it, and much less work for you as the gardener, of making it if you plant a small tree, not a, you should plant small trees too, but even if it's going to be a redwood, or even down here, even though it's going to be, a bald cypress, which is a huge tree. People have been putting those in in swales in cities, and it's just the wrong tree because it produces knees and it's huge, and so they should plant something else that's not going to be as big a problem in the years to come, because it'd be a shame to have a bald cypress that you'd have to chop down in 40 years because it's just too big for the situation. So yeah, you want to look up. And if you are planting something, you can call 811 nationwide to find out if there's anything under the ground that you need to know about. So you don't want to put maples near your septic system or your sewers because it's got aggressive roots. But if you have a rain garden, and a maple is a really good choice. So yeah, you're going to have to work, which is why the native plant societies and the wild one groups are so good, because they are your feet on the ground. They're the ones with the experience. They often have botanists and other things like that. So, and they have, in normal times, non-pandemic times, I have meetings and plant sales and stuff like that. And in Florida here, we've got a great native plant group. And, we have annual meetings, but this year it's going, in May, it's going to be virtual again, because we just didn't want to take the chance, even in May, because who knows what's going to come back.
Yeah. Ginny, you mentioned a couple times that it's important to let your flowers and shrubs go to seed. Can you say a little bit more about that? Why is that so important?
Well, because the birds need the seed, and because that gives you structure. And so if you have a meadow, if you're chopping down the flowers, all the time, then it'll keep producing flowers, but it won't produce the seeds. And the birds, like the goldfinches and the other seed-eating birds, won't have anything to eat. So that's part of being part of the ecosystem. Now you could cut back some of them that are next to the lawn or something so that they don't flop over, but you'd want to basically have a wilder look. And that's where the Highline Park and Lurie Garden and some other wild gardens have redefined what a beautiful garden should look like. And it shouldn't look like Belfast Castle in Ireland with everything trimmed to a fare-thee well.
Yep.
A couple folks had, someone in New Mexico and then somebody else in the Bay Area are, wondering about the balance between gardening and tree planting and water. Can you give folks, a sense of what makes sense in climates where there's just not as much water, or that might be drying out because of climate change?
Yeah, I mean, there was just an article in the New York Times about planting the wrong trees in the wrong place. So yeah, you want trees that are not going to ruin what ecosystem you have. You want ones that are going to be appropriate. And planting trees in arid areas where the trees are not native, or in prairies or in grasslands, is not really a climate-wise thing to do, because the trees don't belong there. So you want to take a cue from wild areas in your, look at the parks and the other things in your area to see what Mother Nature plants naturally, and use that as your cue. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a water feature where you have maybe a kiddie pool that you fill up with water and plants and stuff like that, and you keep that filled, and then you have water-loving plants around it. So all of those water-loving plants would be in one spot.
Yeah, well, I love the fact that you started right off the bat with the lawn, which is such a ubiquitous feature. And I just wanted to, this is not so much a question, it's more piling on here, but I'd like to make the point that, as you said, there are a lot of practical things that you were advising in terms of no fertilizer, no poisons, essentially, which has so many benefits. Mulching, mowing is another way. I mean, we haven't fertilized our yard in 20 years, and it looks great, our lawn. It's because mulching provides like pretty much everything you really need. But the point I wanted to make was that I think sometimes a lot of us feel can be quite passive, and are basically let our lawn care companies just do stuff for us on our behalf.
I know. It's very tempting. Yeah.
I would just make the point for people that it's your yard, so have the conversation with your contractor. Because all you have to do is tell them not to fertilize and not to put down insecticide, and they won't do it. But if you don't tell them that, they're likely to just assume that that's what you want. So I think that a lot of times this is about like having the conversation with these folks and telling them what you want. And if they don't comply, find someone else. There's plenty of other good services out there that will take care of your lawn with battery-powered mowers and all those sorts of things. They're there. You just
right. Yeah. So the other thing about water is that gray water can be treated as well, so that you can take water from your sinks and your showers, run it through filters, and that can be used in some places for your landscape. So there are filtering methods, and some people run the gray water through rocks and that are planted with wetland plants and rushes and that kind of thing, and then it floods over to the end, and then you end up with relatively clean water that you can use in your landscape. So gray water is another thing, but it doesn't keep. So you need to have, you can't just water a little bit, you have to have a predictable thing, because it doesn't keep.
Maybe one or two more, but Brian, Lisa just recently put in the Q&A, is there a law in Portland banning gas-powered leaf blowers? You want to give us a little update for Portland and the rest of the country on where people can go to get those?
Well, there's a lot of work happening all over the country about banning gas-powered leaf blowers. I bet you there are a lot of people on this call who think they're obnoxious. They're more than obnoxious. They're really dangerous and toxic to the operators and to everyone in the community. They produce way more pollution than automobiles in most cities. So I would urge you, if you're interested in this topic, to check out qcpdx.com. That's a local Portland group that's working on banning gas-powered leaf blowers. There's another one called Quiet Communities that's national, that has been doing some really amazing work around this. So there's lots of places to go. You can email me directly if you're interested in this, and I'll try to help you out. But here in Multnomah County, in Portland, we're working on legislation to try to transition away from gas-powered to electric, or just not blow at all. Leave the leaves is a similar kind of notion to what Ginny's been talking about in terms of garden maintenance, which is, the idea of like taking all that delicious rich organic matter away from our plants every year and sending it to landfill is ridiculous. That is good for plants. It's good for the insects. It's good for your soil. So it's more about getting used to the fact that leaves are pretty nice. Maybe not on your driveway, but you leave them in your garden and on your lawn. Maybe not on your lawn. It can kill your lawn. But if you mulch them into your lawn, fantastic. And leave them in your flower beds. Ginny, do you have any comments about leaves? We have a lot of them here in the
Well, yeah, they make a really good base for compost. So that's the brown materials when you're making compost.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Joe, we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, this has been great. We could talk all day, Ginny, but thank you so much.
I know this has been fantastic.
Your great experience and knowledge and expertise, and thank you to all of you who have joined us and are closing out our Sequestration Week 2. We really appreciate folks and your comments in the chat. We hope you've enjoyed these sessions. We have just been floored by the caliber of the people that have shared their expertise with us. So thanks for joining us for that.
Thank you so much, Ginny. This is fantastic. You're a wealth of knowledge.
You're welcome.
Blown away, and I've got to read your book now.
Yes, I've read it.
We're both inspired. We're going to the nursery later today, so we're going to hopefully take some of these practices in right away. But thank you all again, Ginny. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our participants, and like we like to say, good luck with your electrification projects. If you've got, I know we haven't been talking about electrification today, but if you have any questions about electrification, give us a shout. Our emails are on our website, and we'd love to help you out. And we will be sending out as much of these resources and links in our follow-up email as we can. Thanks again, Ginny, and hope to see you all at one of our upcoming webinars.
Yes. Buy Ginny's book, Climate Wise Landscaping. We'll send a link to that tomorrow, as Brian said. Thanks so much, y'all. Good luck with your electrification projects and have a great weekend.